For years, you've been taught that your sensitivity is a flaw, that your depth is inconvenient, that your ability to feel the unspoken tremors in another person's soul makes you too much. But what if the real problem isn't your empathy? What if the problem is a culture that confuses emotional perception with emotional obligation, that treats your attunement as an open invitation to dump their chaos into your nervous system without ever asking if you have room to carry it? Empaths don't burn out because they feel too deeply. They burn out because they've been conditioned to believe that love means self-erasure, that to be needed is to be worthy, that if they just give a little more, hold on a little longer, absorb one more crisis, they'll finally be enough. But here's the truth no one tells you. Empathy without boundaries isn't compassion, it's complicity in your own depletion. Jung spoke of the persona, the mask we wear to be accepted. For the empath, that mask is the eternal listener, the ever-available healer, the calm in everyone else's storm. You've mastered the art of holding space while your own inner world crumbles in silence. You've smiled through grief you didn't cause. You've soothed rage you didn't provoke. You've carried guilt for wounds you didn't create. All because you mistook your capacity to feel for a duty to fix. And all the while, no one asked, who holds you when the storm is yours? You've become a sanctuary for everyone but yourself, a refuge so generous it forgets it too needs shelter. Your body has been screaming through fatigue, through insomnia, through that hollow ache behind your ribs, but your mind was trained to translate pain into service. If I just help them, maybe I'll finally feel seen. But being seen isn't the same as being used. Beneath that carefully maintained exterior of infinite patience lives a self that has never been allowed to say no. A self that equates setting a boundary with betrayal. A self that believes love must be earned through exhaustion. And then something shifts. Not loudly, not dramatically, but deep in the marrow of your being, a quiet rebellion begins. You stop reflexively absorbing the moods of others. You notice yourself hesitating before saying yes. You feel a strange detachment when someone dumps their emotional emergency on you, like watching rain through a window, not standing in it. This isn't coldness. This is clarity. Jung called this the confrontation with the shadow, not the dark, evil part of us, but the disowned truth we've buried to stay loved. For the empath, the shadow is the part that says, I matter too. The part that refuses to set itself on fire to keep others warm. The part that knows, finally, that self-preservation is not selfishness, it's sanity. And when that part awakens, the old patterns can't survive. Because the empath who walks away silently isn't rejecting love. They're rejecting the illusion that love requires their annihilation. They're not disappearing, they're reclaiming. Reclaiming their energy, their peace, their right to exist without being a utility for others' emotional survival. This is where the transformation begins. Not with a shout, but with a whisper. I'm done carrying what isn't mine. And once that whisper becomes a conviction, there's no going back. Because the most dangerous thing an empath can become is unavailable. Not cruel, not heartless, just no longer for rent. And that, more than any rage or protest, is what terrifies those who built their comfort on your silence. This exhaustion you feel, it's not just tiredness, it's the weight of a lifetime spent translating other people's inner chaos into your personal responsibility. You were never taught to protect your energy. You were taught to offer it, freely, endlessly, without question. From childhood, you learned that your value lay in your usefulness, in how quickly you could soothe a tantrum, calm a panic, mediate a fight, or absorb a parent's unspoken despair. You became the emotional regulator in every room you entered, not because you chose to, but because no one else would. And so you grew up believing that love meant vigilance, that care meant sacrifice, that if someone was hurting, it was your job to fix it, even if it cost you your peace, your time, your sense of self. This is what Jung observed as a profound distortion of the soul's natural balance, when the self is split between who you are and who you must pretend to be safe. For the empath, safety was always conditional, granted only as long as you remained emotionally accessible, endlessly accommodating, perpetually there. But here's what no one warned you about. You can't sustain connection when you've erased yourself to create it. Over time, your nervous system adapted. You learned to read micro-expressions like survival signals. You anticipated needs before they were spoken. You muted your own discomfort to make space for others' drama. And in doing so, you slowly disappeared, not all at once, but in 1,000 tiny surrenders, a cancelled plan, a swallowed opinion, a silent tear wiped away before anyone noticed. You became so skilled at holding others that you forgot how to hold yourself. And then, one day, something inside stops responding. Not because you've lost your empathy, but because your psyche has reached its limit. The well isn't just dry, it's cracked. And in that moment of stillness, you realize, I've been giving from nothing for years. This is the turning point, the quiet implosion that precedes rebirth. Imagine someone who has spent decades as the emotional anchor for everyone around them. They're the one called at 3 a.m. with crises that never resolve, the one who mediates family feuds, absorbs workplace toxicity, and listens again and again to the same cycles of self-sabotage, always offering patience, never receiving reciprocity. For years, they believed their role was noble, necessary, even sacred. But their body began to speak a language their mind refused to hear. Migraines that struck during family dinners, panic rising in crowded rooms, a numbness spreading through their chest during conversations that once felt meaningful. Their dreams turned restless. Their joy grew thin. And then came the moment, the ordinary, unremarkable moment, when the phone rang with yet another familiar plea for rescue, and they felt nothing. Not anger, not guilt, not even the old reflex to drop everything and fix it, just a deep, quiet certainty. This is not mine to carry. They didn't yell, they didn't explain, they simply didn't engage. And in that non-response, something monumental occurred. The boundary was born not as a wall, but as a return to self. This isn't detachment, it's discernment. Jung described this as the soul's rebellion against fragmentation. When you've lived too long as a mirror for others' emotions, your true self becomes a ghost in your own life. But the psyche demands wholeness. It will not allow you to vanish forever, not without a reckoning. So it begins with small acts of reclamation. Saying, I can't talk right now, without apology. Leaving a conversation that drains you, even if it's important. Choosing solitude over performance. Letting someone sit in their discomfort without rushing to soothe it. Each choice feels foreign at first, like wearing a new skin. You might even feel guilty, as if you've betrayed your nature. But that guilt, it's not yours. It's the echo of old conditioning. The voice of a world that taught you your worth was measured in how much you could endure. The truth is far more liberating. Your empathy is not a debt you owe the world. It's a gift you choose to give. And once you understand that, everything changes. You stop confusing presence with permission. You stop mistaking your sensitivity for an open door. You begin to see that real compassion doesn't require self-abandonment. It requires self-possession. This is where the silent walk begins, not as an act of punishment, but as an act of integrity.
This is where the silent walk begins, not as an act of punishment, but as an act of integrity. Because the empath who walks away isn't rejecting people, they're rejecting the role they were forced to play. They're no longer willing to be the emotional landfill for unresolved pain, the unpaid therapist for chronic dysfunction, the human sponge for unprocessed rage. They've realized something radical. They are allowed to exist without being useful. And that realization, it's irreversible.
There comes a moment, so quiet it's almost imperceptible, when the empath stops translating other people's pain into personal obligation. It doesn't arrive with thunder, it slips in like dawn, unnoticed at first, but impossible to ignore once the light has fully risen. This is not indifference, it's discernment crystallizing after years of emotional fog. For so long, you believed that to feel someone's suffering was to be responsible for its resolution. You mistook resonance for duty. You thought that because you could sense the fracture in another's spirit, it was your job to mend it, even if it meant splintering your own. And so you gave. Not from overflow, but from erosion. Not from choice, but from compulsion disguised as virtue.
But Carl Jung warned that the psyche cannot sustain a life built on self-betrayal. When the outer self becomes a vessel for everyone else's unprocessed chaos, the inner self begins to wither in protest, not with screams, but with silence. A silence that grows until it becomes the only honest language left. And that silence is where the walk begins, not as escape, but as return. You start noticing the patterns you once normalized, the one-sided conversations, the emergencies that only arise when it's convenient for them, the way your yes was always expected, but your no treated like a betrayal. You see how your empathy was not honored, it was exploited, not as a sacred gift, but as a renewable resource to be mined until depletion.
This realization doesn't come all at once. It gathers in fragments.
The moment you decline a call without rehearsing an excuse, the day you stop absorbing a colleague's anxiety as if it were your own failure, the quiet refusal to apologize for needing space. Each act feels like rebellion, but it's not rebellion against others, it's allegiance to yourself. Jung called this process individuation, the courageous journey toward wholeness by integrating the parts of the self that were exiled for the sake of acceptance. For the empath, the most exiled part is the one that says, "I am not here to be used." The one that knows love does not require self-annihilation. The one that understands that true compassion begins with self-respect, not self-sacrifice. And when that part awakens, the old dynamics collapse, not because you destroy them, but because you stop feeding them. People who relied on your endless availability, will call you distant. They'll say you've changed, as if becoming whole is a flaw. They'll mistake your boundaries for rejection, your peace for coldness, your clarity for cruelty. But what they're really mourning isn't your absence, it's the loss of their emotional convenience. You are no longer their emotional regulator. You are no longer their crisis buffer. You are no longer their unpaid therapist. And that terrifies them, because your silence forces them to face what they've been avoiding, their own unhealed pain. This is the paradox of the awakened empath. Your withdrawal is not abandonment, it's an invitation. An invitation for others to finally take responsibility for their inner world, just as you've begun to take responsibility for yours.
Now you hold only what is yours. You feel deeply, but selectively. You care fiercely, but not indiscriminately. Your silence is not emptiness, it's sovereignty. And when you finally stop explaining why you need peace, when you cease justifying your right to exist without being useful, that's when you become truly free. Because the empath who walks away silently isn't running from love. They're walking toward themselves. And once they arrive, they never return to the role of emotional martyr again.
Carl Jung taught that the shadow is not our darkness, it is our unlived life, the parts of ourselves we disown because the world told us they were unacceptable. For the empath, the shadow isn't rage or cruelty, it's self-priority. It's the quiet no that was never allowed to form on the lips. It's the right to exist without being emotionally extractive. It's the truth that you can love someone and still protect your peace. For years, you buried that truth. You called it selfishness. You mistook it for hardness. You feared that if you stopped giving endlessly, you'd be abandoned, or worse, deemed unworthy of love. So you kept your shadow chained, feeding the world your light until there was nothing left but ash. But the psyche will not be silenced forever.
When the empath begins to integrate their shadow, something radical happens. They stop confusing empathy with obligation. They realize that feeling another's pain does not mean they must dissolve themselves to soothe it. They learn that true compassion is not measured by how much you suffer for others, but by how whole you remain while walking beside them. This is conscious empathy. It's not numbness, it's not detachment, it's discernment in motion. You sense the anxiety in a friend's voice, but you don't absorb it into your nervous system. You witness a partner's grief, but you don't make it your emergency to fix. You see the manipulation beneath a family member's guilt trip, but you no longer internalize it as your failure. You feel deeply, accurately, intuitively, but you no longer fuse. And in that space between feeling and fusing, your freedom is born.
This shift is invisible to outsiders. They don't see the internal architecture being rebuilt. They only notice that you're no longer available on demand, that your energy is no longer porous, that you no longer rush to fill the emotional voids others refuse to face. And that unsettles them, because your transformation exposes a lie they've been living, that your endless giving was love, when in truth it was survival. Your silence now forces them to confront their own emotional laziness, their reliance on your sensitivity as a crutch, not a connection. They may accuse you of becoming cold, but what they're really saying is, I miss the version of you that let me avoid myself. They may call you selfish, but what they mean is,
I benefited from your self-abandonment, and I don't know how to relate to you now that you've stopped disappearing. This is the price of wholeness. Not everyone will recognize you on the other side. But that's not your burden anymore.
Jung understood that individuation is inherently disruptive. When you stop performing the role others assigned you, the healer, the peacemaker, the emotional sponge, you rupture the illusion of harmony that was built on your silence. Relationships that depended on your depletion begin to unravel. Not because you destroyed them, but because they were never real to begin with. They were transactions dressed as love. And in that unraveling, you discover something profound. The people who truly value you don't need you to be small. They don't require your exhaustion as proof of your care. They honor your boundaries as sacred. They meet your no with respect, not resentment. These are the ones who stay. The others? Their departure is not loss, it's liberation. Because the integrated empath no longer seeks validation through usefulness, they no longer equate being needed with being loved. They know that real love doesn't drain you, it nourishes you. It doesn't demand your silence, it creates space for your voice. And so you stop apologizing for taking up space. You stop shrinking to make others comfortable. You stop translating your boundaries into palatable explanations for those who never respected them in the first place. Your no is no longer a negotiation, it's a declaration of selfhood. This is not the end of empathy, it's its purification. You are no longer a mirror that reflects everyone else's chaos. You are a vessel, clear, contained, and whole, capable of holding space without losing yourself within it. And in that clarity, you become a quiet revolution. Because in a world that profits from emotional labor, especially from those conditioned to give without question, choosing yourself is an act of defiance. Protecting your peace is resistance. Refusing to be used is radical. The empath who walks away silently isn't retreating from the world. They're reclaiming their soul from the altar of other people's expectations. And once that soul is reclaimed, it cannot be unclaimed. The empath who walks away silently doesn't vanish. They return to themselves. And in that return, they become whole. This is not the end of connection, it's the beginning of authentic relationship, built not on need, but on mutual respect. Not on depletion, but on reciprocity. Not on performance, but on presence. You've spent years believing your sensitivity was a liability, that your depth made you fragile, that your ability to feel the unspoken made you a target for emotional extraction. But what if your sensitivity was never the problem? What if it was always your greatest strength, misused, misunderstood, but never diminished? Carl Jung believed that the ultimate purpose of life is to become who you truly are. For the empath, that becoming begins the moment you stop sacrificing your inner world to maintain peace in someone else's. It begins when you realize that love should never cost you your soul. And once you realize that, you cannot unsee it. Your silence is no longer submission. It's sovereignty. Your withdrawal is no longer weakness, it's wisdom. Your boundaries are no longer walls, they're declarations of self-worth. You no longer confuse empathy with martyrdom. You no longer mistake availability for intimacy. You no longer believe that being needed means you matter. Because you know deep in your bones that you mattered all along. Even when no one asked how you were. even when your pain went unseen, even when your cup was empty and you kept pouring anyway. That was not love. That was survival. Now you choose something different. You choose to feel without fusing, to care without collapsing, to hold space without losing yourself inside it. This is not selfishness. This is sanity. This is not coldness. This is clarity. This is not abandonment. This is alignment. And in this alignment, you become a beacon, not because you shine for others, but because you've stopped dimming yourself to make them comfortable.
Your transformation ripples outward. It gives other empaths permission to breathe. It shows the exhausted healers that they too deserve care. It whispers to the silent sufferers, you don't have to disappear to be loved. You are not too much. You never were. You are precisely calibrated for a world that has forgotten how to feel responsibly. Your empathy is not a flaw, it's a compass. And now you're finally using it to navigate back to yourself. So when you walk away, quietly, firmly, without explanation, know this: you are not closing the door on love. You are opening it to yourself. And once you step through, you never return to the role of emotional sacrifice again. Because the most radical act an empath can commit is this: to choose themselves, fully, fiercely, finally. And in that choice, they become not less loving, but more free. Free to love from wholeness, not lack. Free to give from overflow, not obligation. Free to exist, not as a resource, but as a revelation. This is your individuation. This is your return. This is why empaths walk away silently and never return.